Hello, my darlings, and welcome to Radio Wasteland, your show about the paranormal, the unexplained, and the nefarious. Your regular host, Chauncey, is off tonight. He was kidnapped by mysterious agents of the Shadow Government and is currently undergoing re-education at one of their many convenient secret outposts. He'll be back next week, although he will not be the same. My name is Sean, but lest you worry that my voice will be monopolizing your eardrums for the coming hour, don't. We're not alone. Author and recurring guest William Pullin from UFO Real was kind enough to come on with us here. He'll be discussing the recent Roswell Festival and other topics related to UFOs. William, do we have you on here with us?
I am here, and that,
fantastic.
That scenario you just described sounds like something out of Clockwork Orange.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, it's kind of an occupational hazard for us, conspiracy theory radio hosts. You say the wrong thing, and then, someone with an earpiece and mirrored shades is tapping you on the shoulder and ushering you into a van with tinted windows. But, it's nothing we don't expect.
Calm about all that,
yeah. We all know the risks. To be clear to our any of our audience who might be convinced by what I just said, that is all a joke. I don't know where he is. He told me, but it wasn't very interesting, so I didn't assimilate that knowledge. He's on the road. I don't know.
Well,
anyway,
we could have him back next week.
Yes, we will. Re-educated and ready to spout the Illuminati party line.
He might be more right than you think. I don't know.
Maybe. So. As I said, I don't actually know where he is, so I might be coincidentally right about all of that.
Perhaps.
Yeah. All right, well, I do appreciate you coming on here. It occurs to me we really should have had you on last week, because I just found out today, 1 week ago, was World UFO Day, which I did not know at the time, but it would have been appropriate.
Yeah, it's. I wasn't aware of that date until about 5 years ago.
Really?
I've still yet to
July 2nd. Yeah.
Yeah, hear a definitive answer as to. Well, let me rephrase that. I've heard several explanations as to why that date is World UFO Day, and none of them sounded really firm. So I just kind of go with it. But I'm with you. I didn't really know about it until recently. So,
okay, I just have to say I love that, because it is just so thoroughly typical that no one knows where this date came from, and there are varying theories, but none of them are all that convincing. That's just perfectly apropos for a UFO day.
Yeah, it sounds like individuals trying to explain a certain UFO sighting.
Exactly.
Which will remain unnamed, but it's called Roswell. There's a whole list of explanations, but for me personally, every day is UFO day.
Well, that is true. And I do I do want to launch into the Roswell stuff in the next segment here, but since this first segment is usually just warming up the radio and all that, I just want to ask you, before we move on, a question that's been on my mind. So, I'm a pretty amateur ufologist here, if you can, really even call me that. I've only really been following what's going on in UFO land for about a year. So it seems to me, as a layman, that 2018 is a pretty unprecedented year in terms of the willingness of mainstream news outlets to report on UFO-related events without, feeling the need to code everything they say in a thick layer of irony or haha, this is just a joke style reporting. I'm wondering, do you think we're seeing a paradigm shift here in the way organizations report on UFO researchers? This just kind of a temporary blip?
Well, it's definitely been a problem through history that the UFO issue has not been treated seriously by media outlets, the major media outlets, certainly here in the United States. So that's changed as of late.
Exactly. Yeah.
About the last calendar year. I think it'll keep going in that direction. It seems that the media outlets, the major media outlets, have really made an effort to treat it with more respect. I don't know if that's going to lead to anything else beyond that, but it's definitely a refreshing change from what's been going on for 60-some-odd years, where reporters report this issue with a tongue-in-cheek approach.
Right. I can only imagine. And you've been following this for how long? at this point?
Since the late 80s.
Since the late 80s. So, yeah, you've had your share of not being taken seriously, I can only assume.
Oh, sure, yeah. I've been attacked and ridiculed at times. I just blow it off. I mean, it is what it is. It's a situation that really isn't going to change. But having, well, I'll use this term loosely, journalists cover the UFO issue as seriously as they would any other issue. That's a refreshing change. Whether that leads to anything else, we shall see. But it's nice to see. It's nice to turn on TV and see a serious UFO-related story as opposed to a story that's garners laughter in the studio after the story's done. So
right.
It's a good change. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think has kicked that off? Is it mostly the Washington Post story last year, or you were saying last calendar year? So even before that, it sounds like you're saying this has been changing.
I got a feeling that there were some outlets that were, I guess I could put it this way. It's been a gradual shift. I recall I saw a story on Fox News 4 or 5 years ago where they ran a story on the anniversary of the Pascagoula abduction, which was in, I think, October of 73. They ran a story on the anniversary of that UFO sighting. I'd never seen a UFO story seriously reported on Fox News.
Interesting.
So that transpired. But then all the media coverage around the Pentagon UFO story and all the surrounding issues around that came late last year. And that really, that has certainly at least made the issue more approachable in a serious way. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that really,
when reading about the 2004 sightings, the grainy black and white Tic Tac videos, those 3 videos, I'm just continually surprised reading those and having the article seemingly be completely serious. Like, it's for me, who's not been following this, it's extremely surreal to just look at my daily news and find people reporting seriously on UFOs.
Yeah, it's a total change of pace. Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I take the UFO issue very seriously myself.
Of course, yeah.
So I'm not used to seeing it reported seriously like it has been as of late. And it's a welcome change, regardless of whether the story comes out to be, whatever the explanation is to the story, it's still an unidentified flying object and it's being reported as seriously as an economic crisis or a terrorist act or what have you. That's a refreshing change compared to the last 60 years. That's a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned earlier whether or not that leads to anything else. By anything else, do you mean like a broader disclosure by governments or?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, whatever develops and transpires after this, I'm a cautious person, so I'll wait and see what happens. But it's at least the coverage has changed. Whether that ends up with a kind of a snowball effect and other things transpire beyond that, that'd be great. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on our first break here. When we come back, I want to ask about the Roswell Festival and everything that went on there. You all are listening to Radio Wasteland. Come on back.
On the officers say the missile found sometime last week has been inspected.
Welcome back. You're listening to Radio Wasteland. We're talking with William Pullin about the Roswell Festival and all other things UFO. Yes, that's right. We're covering literally every UFO-related topic in this hour, so stay tuned. William, you were at... Yeah, it may have bitten off more than I can chew there, but don't tell anyone that.
No. We're good. I really don't mind talking about UFOs, so.
Right. Well, that's perfect. So you were at the Roswell Festival this last weekend. Is that right? In New Mexico,
yes, sir.
there. Yeah. So I'm actually not too familiar with the Roswell Festival. I'm familiar with Alien Con. Is this a similar sort of setup? Speakers, panels, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it pretty much is. The speakers / presenters are organized by the UFO Museum there in Roswell.
I see.
And the remainder of the events are organized by the city. So it's like two entities working together loosely hand in hand to produce the festival. But it's kind of the same scenario.
Yeah. Well, how was it? I'm jealous. I wish I could have gone.
It was great. It was great. I don't do any of the festivities outside the museum. I just attend as many presentations as I can and talk with these authors and researchers, some of which are really good friends that I see once a year.
Yeah.
So, it came out great. It was a wonderful. Well, the festival was 3 days. But my good friend Don Schmidt arrived basically a week before the festival, so I got to talk to him and spend some time with him before the festival started.
Right. I wanted to ask you about his research in the next segment coming up here, so hold that thought.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we had a pretty impressive list of guest speakers at the conference. You know, you've got Stanton Friedman, who's the original civilian investigator at Roswell, Stephen Bassett, lots of big names. Are there any highlights from the conference that really stood out to you while you were there?
Well, on a personal note, I'd never met in person Stephen Bassett.
Mm-hmm.
And I cordially disagree with his stance on disclosure. I don't feel it's going to happen, and he feels it is. And we've exchanged emails before, but I met him in person, attended his presentation Sunday morning, and that was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The Stanton Friedman retirement ceremony, which was basically all weekend, was very emotional, especially toward the end.
Yeah.
But it was a series of great moments and memories. So it's a wonderful weekend. I'm already counting the days till next year. So
yeah.
You know.
Yeah, those were just the two names that kind of popped out at me when I was perusing the guest list. But what were some of the various topics that were being discussed in these presentations? Was it like people presenting their research?
Well, Ted Freeman was, he's been speaking about the idea of how these extraterrestrials are conquering the vast distances it takes to get here to Earth. He's taken a astronomical approach. Don Schmidt and Tom Carey were covering a lot of the issues surrounding the cover-up of the event. Frank Kimbler, he's a professor of geology at New Mexico Military Institute up the street from the museum. He strictly takes a scientific approach to recovering or attempting to recover physical evidence from the debris field. And his presentations reflect that. So it runs the whole gamut, but each speaker had a different take on the general scenario of Roswell. So. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I've always kind of wondered about the first topic you mentioned, the conquering the vast distances and involved in that sort of thing. Is that something that ufologists can reasonably come up with conclusions about? I always got the impression that it was something that was just beyond the scope of what we knew about these sightings at this point, that we couldn't even begin to guess. But
I guess since none of us are extraterrestrials and we don't have any, we believe when none of us are, we'll see what happens with that. But since we haven't conquered the stars, we haven't traveled to anywhere other than our own moon.
Mm-hmm.
We have no perspective. We are blissfully unaware of the technology that they have. But Mr. Friedman is a nuclear physicist, so he's, as far as his education and his background, he's very qualified to speak on astronomical issues such as distance, speed, time, those kind of variables. So he's one of the ufologists in the UFO community is very qualified to speak in that direction. And I think that's why he focuses on that a bit, because he has a different perspective as opposed to some other researchers that focus on different things. So,
interesting.
Well, it makes a good case for it.
Yeah, so. Well, what did he have to say about that? Did he have any theories as to how it's possible?
He basically said a lot of scientists they're chauvinistic toward the human race. They apply our standards to the ETs, saying, well, they can't. How did they get here from there? If you travel closer and closer to the speed of light, your ship gets heavier and heavier, which means it takes infinite energy to drive your ship, which is theoretically an impossible scenario. But you can't throw away the data. The data shows us alien visitations happening. So somehow they're getting here. But a lot of scientists in the main scientific community they're unaware of UFO data. So they're making statements that are, for lack of a better term, ignorant. Because when you make a statement, when a scientist certainly does, makes a statement about a a scenario where that scientist has not done the background to become aware of the data surrounding that scenario, their statement is in error, or can be in error, or certainly ignorant of what's transpiring. So, whereas Mr. Friedman is very aware of the vast majority of the data, and certainly somehow they're getting here. And it remains to be seen how. But Friedman, Stanton has a pretty open mind as to the possibilities. And a lot of scientists assume, well, we can't get there. How can they do that? They're assuming that that the ET's level of technology is the same as ours, or the age of their civilization is the same as ours. Right. Those are variables we have no idea about. So, but clearly they're visiting. So somehow they're getting here, and we don't know how.
Right.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean that's a really big point. Good point that you bring up there. That in a way, not being familiar with all of this data is detrimental to mainstream science as well. Because if you're someone who's thinking about physical issues like FTL travel and things related to that, then you can't discount, hey, there's good evidence that there are other creatures who have mastered these technologies. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I recall back in the 70s, Carl Sagan and J. Allen Hynek, Dr. Hynek, had a debate, and I can't recall the forum. It was on television, network television. Mm-hmm. And Carl Sagan was attempting to sweep away the data using theories that had no data to back them up.
Right.
So he was making ignorant statements, and Dr. Hynek was simply saying, look, we have quality data, voluminous amounts of data that have to be explained. And the theories Mr. Sagan was putting forth wasn't explaining the data. So he was just throwing out ideas, which certain scientists in the mainstream do, and a few don't. A few of them actually are aware of the data and they make more informed statements and more informed speculations as to what might be happening. So,
right. Yeah, the data is definitely more compelling than, if you're a typical scientist, probably you think, I don't have to be familiar with this because I already know there's nothing there, because none of my colleagues are taking it seriously. And it's just this vicious cycle of people not taking the data seriously because they think they don't have to.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head right there. Yeah, they're assuming, they're going with the status quo of the rest of the community. Mm-hmm. They're not taking it seriously. So they just brushed away.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked about in the first segment that changing a little bit in the media. Now I'm just going off of that. We're getting off topic, but I don't care. Have you seen any signs of that changing in the mainstream scientific community? Because it seems like that's a pretty hard nut to crack. I haven't seen a lot of change in there.
Physicist, I'm going to butcher his name, Michio Kaku. I believe
right.
That's his name, how you pronounce it.
Love that guy.
He makes pretty objective statements about the UFO phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
He entertains potentialities. He does not brush away the data. And I've heard him make statements basically making the case that we don't know what's out there. Therefore, we can't assume or make any statements of fact concerning what's out there because we don't know. We don't know how advanced they are. We don't know who they are. We don't know how they get there. We can't assume anything because that's an uninformed statement. And that's something some other scientists, and I have their names in my head, won't say. They brush away the data. They brush away. They say, well, where are they all? Where's this, that, and the other? And that's fine. Everyone has their own opinion, but it's okay being skeptical. I'm a skeptic myself, but a skeptic as far as when I hear something, I want to see the data. And if the data shows something anomalous happened, I'm there. I'm good. Let's investigate it.
Yeah.
But some skeptics are hardened and refuse to look at the data at all. That's not healthy for anybody. So, but if the media takes the UFO issue more seriously, then hopefully the scientific community will start to take it more seriously. And that's been a big issue. The UFO community and the whole UFO issue is not taken seriously by anybody, including some individuals in the UFO community. It's horrible, and hopefully that will change. It needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. We're coming up on our next break here. I want to ask you in the next segment about Donald Raymond Schmidt, who couldn't be here tonight, but his research sounds really fascinating, and I want to know a little bit about it. Okay. So, when we come back, Donald Raymond Schmidt. Welcome back. You're listening to Radio Wasteland. We're speaking with William Pullin about the Roswell Festival and all things UFO. So, William, you mentioned earlier Donald Schmidt. I always want to say Donald Raymond Schmidt. I don't know why I want to say all three of his names, but it just rolls off the tongue really well.
Sounds very formal.
Exactly, it does. Donald Raymond Schmidt. Yes. So he was a panelist at this festival, and you mentioned on Facebook that you were looking for the opportunity to share some thoughts about his research here. I admit I'm not particularly familiar with his work, but what is it exactly that he's been doing?
Well, Stan Friedman was the original researcher. And he broke the story, or the story broke as a result of his work. I believe it was 1978.
Right.
In the late 80s, Don Schmidt and he had been working at the Center for UFO Studies for Alan Hynek for over 10 years.
Really?
Hynek had passed away by 86, I believe. And Schmidt asked Dr. Kevin Randall to take a look at the Roswell case. And they initially made their first trip to Roswell back in 89. And their research progressed from then. They worked together till the mid-90s. And then Schmidt ended up, or Donald Raymond Schmidt, I should say, teamed up with Tom Carey, I believe about the late 90s. And it produced 3 or 4, maybe perhaps 5 books on the Roswell case. Pretty grounded researcher. He's a personal friend, but I'm trying not to be biased here. But pretty grounded researcher. Unlike a lot of researchers in the UFO community, he has the ability to admit when he's wrong, and he has done that on several occasions, and has debunked some evidence which previously was in favor of the extraterrestrial theory for Roswell. He found some witnesses with Randall. I can think of Frank Kaufman offhand, who testified about certain things. And through his own efforts, Schmidt proved that testimony wrong years later. So he's not a biased researcher. So, and a good friend. So,
but you mentioned the extraterrestrial theory for the Roswell event. I had here's how much I know about this. I'd always assumed that was kind of the only strain of thought out there about this particular event because it was just so bizarre. But it sounds like, is it actually the main thought about Roswell in the UFO community that it was extraterrestrial?
This is interesting. I'm going to get negative emails from what I'm about to say.
Well,
there's a whole list of explanations. Some individuals believe the mogul balloon theory, which the Air Force put out. Some individuals believe it was Nazi technology. Some believe it was a regular weather balloon. Some believe nothing out of the ordinary happened at Roswell. There's a couple of members in my group. I remember writing a poll question in my group, You For Real, and that's a cheap plug for my group, but a couple of individuals stated in a poll question they believe nothing transpired at Roswell at all.
Oh,
in any way, shape, or form.
I actually remember that. Now that you're saying that.
Which is interesting, yeah. But what has happened over the years is that, yes, there's not a physical piece of the craft. So the extraterrestrial theory cannot be proven as such. But the vast majority of the evidence, quality testimony, the reaction of the military, the coverage by the newspapers, all the other possibilities to explain Roswell have kind of been debunked. All that's left is extraterrestrial.
Right.
In my mind, it's mainly, okay, you've got military testimony, a core of which is held up under intense scrutiny. You have the reaction of the military. The military reacted like they had never come across this scenario at all. This balloon
right, they didn't know what they were doing. Right. They got there and were like, "Oh my God!" And then you see a coordinated response a few days later.
Yeah. So my feeling is that the evidence that's all that's kind of left on the table, extraterrestrial. But again, you can't prove it without a piece of crap. That's what Frank Kimbler is attempting to find, a piece of physical evidence. but it's still an open case.
Right.
I think among the researchers, they have varying percentages as far as how much they feel is extraterrestrial. And Don Schmidt actually is around middle range there. He's not totally convinced it is.
He's not totally. Yeah, that's interesting.
No. But it's I think it's certainly the most common or the most popular theory explaining Roswell is the ET theory.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly what's associated with Roswell in the popular consciousness.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. So
yeah.
Hence the festival. So.
Hence the festival and the whole Roswell Museum setup.
Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned that it was an open case a minute ago and that people are still looking for hard evidence. Now, this Roswell crash was a little while ago. It seems like every year that passes, the odds of really figuring out what happened there are getting slimmer. But is that the case, or are we finding new stuff all the time about this case?
From a testimony standpoint, it is. Applying my own standard, I only accept first-hand testimony. I don't accept anything else other than that.
Right.
And so first-hand witnesses are pretty much all gone.
Exactly.
So you're left with the acquirement of military documents, which hasn't happened. Although there's a few documents, the infamous MJ-12 documents come to mind, which refer to Roswell or refer to it in a kind of a roundabout way.
Right. You
had newspaper coverage. You had the military's reaction. I keep going back to that because the military acted like it wasn't an average day event. You don't close roads off to recover a weather balloon. You don't send the weather balloon to Wright Field to have it reverse engineered. Because even by the Air Force's own explanation, they feel they're advocating it's a mobile balloon. Well, that was a secret operation, but none of the technology was secret. It was over-the-counter materials. So there's no reason to send that to get reverse engineered. That makes no sense.
Right.
What does make sense is if something out of the ordinary crashed, you would send it to Wright Field, and certainly something extraterrestrial qualifies. But again, you can't prove it. It can be very frustrating, but it's now a quest to recover physical evidence, and I think some could still be out there. But you're right, it does get harder as time goes on, but it's pushing forward. So
in fact, I think you mentioned that the last time we were on here that there were potentially materials from Roswell that were snapped up by was it the Air Force you said?
Yeah, well, it was the Army Air Force at the time, when this happened.
That are, potentially sitting in a warehouse somewhere or wherever they end up. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's the testimony is that the Army Air Force sent personnel out there to recover the debris that was left. And it's a safe assumption that it was sent to Wright Field.
Right.
On the way to Wright Field, it was a stop off at Carswell Air Force, or Carswell Field, I should say. But when a craft, let's eliminate extraterrestrial. Let's just talk about an airplane. When an airplane blows up or crashes, there's innumerable numbers of small pieces of metal that are embedded in the ground. There's no way to pick up every single piece of metal. There isn't. Some metal will wash away with storms. Some metals will be covered up by plants and be deposited in cracks and crevices in the ground. It's kind of, you look at the universe, what are the chances that we're the only life in the universe with all the billions of planets? Probably zero. There has to be someone else out there, obviously, because the number is dictated. Well, you look at the Roswell case, there are probably millions of pieces of metal or whatever the ship was made out of, or whatever craft there was made out of. Did they pick up every single piece? Probably not.
So there might be still some just outstanding out in nature, you're saying? Yeah,
I mean, they're probably extremely small and Frank,
probably difficult to identify, to say the least.
Yeah, Frank Coomer has recovered 8 to 12 small pieces of metallic substance, which are somewhat anomalous in nature, but testing is not cheap. And he's found some things that are slightly anomalous as far as the levels of the elements contained within them. So that doesn't prove they're extraterrestrial, but they don't really belong out there. So he's going in that direction. That's a good way to go. So.
Right. We had a researcher on a few weeks ago talking about the Bob White artifact, talking about the difficulty of testing to see.
Yeah, it is.
How. And I imagine that's only a much larger concern when you're talking about minute metal shards rather than a whole object.
Yeah, because I guess from the standpoint of how large or how small these pieces are, when you're testing these pieces, you don't have a lot to test.
Right, exactly.
They're smaller than a pinky nail. So, but that's really that because the witnesses are passing away so quickly because of Father Time. The only angle to take is an attempt to recover something that was out there, test it, and find out if it's an isotope of something that's not of this Earth. That's really the only angle that's left. Right. Yeah. Unless documents are released all of a sudden, and the government is not going to do that.
You mentioned that that the pieces recovered were somewhat anomalous. What does that mean in this case?
Well, he had them tested to find out the levels of iron, aluminum, titanium, phosphate, the different elements that are contained within, and he compared them to normal everyday items that were present in 1947. Aluminum cans, military buttons, bullets, things that may have been out in the field in the late 40s because it was near an airbase. Well, it was 76 miles from an airbase, but things that were existent in the late 40s. And the metal does not match up to the bullets at the time. It doesn't match up to aluminum cans at the time. It doesn't. It's just slightly anomalous, but it's not anomalous enough to really jumps out and grabs you.
Right, it's not a smoking gun.
Yeah, so, and it continues. More testing needs to be done, but Frank Kimbler goes out there on his summertime. He's off during the summer, so he goes out there on his own time and on his own dollar to do these things, and he gets a little funding from the museum. But these tests are not cheap, and he's got a family and a wife to support, so it's a scenario where he does it when he can. But again, that would be done if the scientific community would treat this seriously. We would have access to all these facilities to test these things, but that's not the case. So we have to do that out of our own pocket, and that's not cheap.
Okay.
So
we're right at the next commercial break here. When you come back, we're talking to William Pullin about the UFO. Welcome back. This is Radio Wasteland. We're speaking with William Pullin about Roswell, all things Roswell related, and UFOs. A while back we had another ufologist on who we respected quite a bit. I cannot for the life of me remember who it was. I was going back through the archives to try to figure it out. But
was it Dennis Balthaser?
I don't think so.
Okay, you guys had him on a few weeks back.
No, this was last year. This was earlier in our show. But so they mentioned, we just happened to bring up Roswell, and they mentioned that they were somewhat dismayed that Roswell had such an important place in the public consciousness because they felt there were other UFO sightings since then that were more convincing or more significant. But what's your feeling on that? Does the Roswell incident sort of deserve the reputation it has as the number one UFO incident people think of in the United States?
I think it's an important one, but the trouble is it's so far in the past.
Exactly.
It's certainly the elephant in the room. It takes a lot of the air out of the balloon. But there's a lot of quality cases that are much closer in time, that have testimony, that have some physical evidence that need to be looked at and have been looked at. But it kind of is what it is. I mean, I'm in my own group. I don't really cover anything Roswell related until about a month before the festival, because of that scenario. I try to attack other issues and other cases, and it not ignore, but really kind of push aside Roswell until the festival arrives, because it gets enough press as it is. And then, so I can see that point. That is true. It does get a lot more coverage, or it's known more widely to the public than other cases, certainly. But it's still a quality case, but it's just one of several anomalous events that have occurred that don't really have a concrete answer. I guess that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
It seems like one of the things that sets the Roswell incident apart is really the fact that the government and military officials didn't have as clear of a plan for dealing with this kind of situation at the time, and now they do. And so their reaction is a little bit more telling. Do you think that's true?
I see that's a fair assessment. Yes, I agree with that. You know, there's the name of the case is escaping me, but there's a case dated from the early 40s of a crash, UFO crash, and I don't feel that crash is legitimate because one, there's a shortage of witness testimony firsthand and physical evidence. Two, if that crash, the name escapes me now. I'll probably remember it tomorrow. But if that crash was legitimate, I would think the military's reaction to Roswell would be different because the crash had already occurred.
Interesting.
But clearly, the military acted like they didn't know how to handle this scenario. I think that's one of the stronger. But again, that's not evidence per se. That's a feeling. We need evidence. Right. But it is what it is. I still think it's a strong case. It's not the amount of evidence the amount of strong evidence for Roswell is not as voluminous as it used to be. In the late 80s, early 90s, there were a ton of witnesses. It was a very robust case. Now it's still strong, but it's not as robust. And that's because of quality work from guys like Don Schmitt and Tom Carey and Stan Friedman. They were able to weed out some testimony that was not legitimate. But there's still that solid core of evidence that something anomalous happened. So it's still important.
Yeah. What are some of the other cases that, what are the Roswells of the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s,
Well, there's the Socorro landing of April 64, which is an ultra witness case. It did have physical evidence. It involved Lonnie Zamora, who was a police officer. There was, of course, Rendlesham Forest in December of 80, which has been written about and is still a lively case. The Phoenix Lights of 1997. Yes. Stephenville, Texas. So all these cases are much closer in time. So certainly, at least the witnesses, the majority of them are still alive to examine, to interview. And there's a lot of other cases that don't get as much press per se, but that have occurred since Roswell. I mean, we're talking, 50s and 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. That deserve a lot of examination. Although I am troubled, though, that as of late, there hasn't been really a big flap. There hasn't been a really big UFO event as of late. The last one I can recall is Stephenville in 2008. The last one that was really grab you and say, what's going on? There hasn't been one since. And that's interesting by itself. So.
Yeah, well, we're coming up on the end of the show here. As we do, I'd like to give you a chance to tell our audience how they can find out a bit more about you and how they can find a bit more about UFOs, if this is something they're interested in but don't really know about.
We can look up my group and page on Facebook is called U for Real, a Historical Review. The group is where I do my work, do case summaries, book reviews, poll questions, basically promoting an exchange of ideas and comments from people, a cordial exchange. Right. That's where they can look me up and find me there. The page, which has the corresponding same name, is where I advertise for other individuals I know in the UFO community to help promote their efforts and go from there. So that's where everyone can find me.
Okay. Before we finish up here, is there anything you would say to anyone who might be listening who is not very familiar with the evidence for UFOs and is maybe pretty skeptical? Is there anything you would say to someone like that to maybe sway them? Or
if the individual is skeptical about the scenario, I think apply yourself. Go to a library, go to different databases, different blog spots that present objective amounts of evidence. Kevin Randall has a great blog spot available. You can read the numbers of books that have been put out, and just educate themselves as far as what the data shows. And if they still don't believe in the reality of the UFO phenomenon, then at least they've made the effort to educate themselves. And that way, that conclusion is at least an informed one, and go from there. But I think it pays dividends to simply know what's going on, know what's been reported, and make up your own mind as to what actually may be the cause of it. So that's a good thing.
All right. Well, William, as always, it's been a pleasure here. we're going to do a bonus segment after the show that archival listeners can find on our website. You've been listening to William Pullin on Radio Wasteland. All right. Welcome back. This is Radio Wasteland. We're speaking with William Pullin about Roswell and all things UFO. So, I was reading the other day, and this kind of surprised me, because, as I mentioned in the first segment, I felt like UFO phenomena are getting more attention and respect recently. I was reading that the number of sightings in the U.S. have been dropping recently, or in the past few years, that there haven't been as many of late. And yet, for some reason, there have been a huge number since 1997 in Chile. Have you heard any of this recently?
Yeah, I've heard a scenario like that. South America has a long history of UFO sightings.
Interesting.
Some high-quality sightings by military personnel. As far as the number of sightings here in the States, I would have to look that number up. I'm unaware of any kind of drop in the number of sightings. I know MUFON does a good job tracking those.
Right. So what the article was actually saying, it was talking with a statistician from MUFON. They were saying that the sightings had peaked in 2012, which is kind of what you'd expect, with all the whole Mayan 2012 end of the world stuff, and had dropped off a little bit since then, again, as you'd expect, following a peak, but that they'd kind of been expecting the sightings to creep back up again, and yet the numbers have still continued to drop, which was the perplexing bit. You mentioned earlier
that is interesting, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that you felt there hadn't really been a high-quality sighting in the U.S. since 2008. Is that right?
Yeah, and then, one that really grabs you and say, wow, that's something really strange going on, a real hardcore case that really grabs you. I don't know if one that really has occurred with that kind of feeling. Although I do believe sometimes the numbers are skewed because the vast majority of individuals that have a UFO sighting don't report it.
Right.
So trying to extrapolate patterns or numbers from the data is difficult because the data is not complete. So it may be just that it's not that sightings have, the number of sightings may not have dropped, but it may be the number of reported sightings that has dropped.
Oh, no, that's
interesting.
A possibility. Yeah, that's very interesting. It's possible that maybe with social media and all that kind of thing, people are worried that if they report things or if they tell anyone about them, that it will be easier for that to have some kind of effect on their reputation. Maybe it's not a UFO thing. Maybe it's a societal thing.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, that's certainly. That's speculation on our part. Yeah, but it's a possibility. It is a possibility.
Yeah. That's very interesting. You mentioned that South America has a long history of UFO sightings. This is actually news to me. That's pretty interesting. Are there any in particular that really stick out in Chile and areas around there?
Well, there was a reported crash in Ubatuba, Brazil, I believe in the 60s.
Interesting.
That was investigated by APRO at the time. APRO was the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization. It was an early version of MUFON, basically. It was a civilian organization. They investigated that. That's still entertained as a legitimate crash by some individuals, but as the UFO community goes. But there was an event. I'm drawing a blank again. There was an event held in Washington where military officials testified before retired members of Congress. And one of the individuals was a Chilean Air Force pilot who had a very close encounter with an anomalous object over Chilean airspace. So here is a quality observer individual. They reported this to his higher-ups, and he faced no reprimand from his commanders. It's treated differently there as opposed to the States. which is kind of the scenario everywhere in the world. Everywhere in the world, this issue is treated differently than here in the United States, which is unfortunate.
Really?
So
you think there's more of a stigma here in the U.S. towards these issues?
I've always felt that. I mean, you go to Mexico and you turn on 60 Minutes down there, and you see UFO stories.
So maybe we're just catching up with the rest of the world recently.
We're so far behind. And
interesting.
It seems, to me, it's always been like that.
Why is that? We have such a strong history of UFO sightings in this country. You'd think this would be the most credulous place, if anything. That's
true. That's very true. Well, it seems like with the United States has been the leader in a lot of fields in world history. They have been, or we have been. But I recall researching. I spent some time researching the Australian military/government's attempts to investigate the UFO phenomenon. And there was a case in Australia. I think it was the early '60s, and some military officials in Australia contacted their counterparts in the United States to find out what their feelings were about this UFO phenomenon. And they were told by individuals in our military that, no, there's nothing to it. It's just misrepresentations of a mundane phenomenon. Don't worry about it. Nothing to do. So the Australians didn't continue their investigations. So they were influenced directly by our response.
Interesting.
So we've had an influence on how other countries conduct themselves. But that has changed in the last few decades. There's been files released, and civilian and military pilots are treated differently. In fact, military personnel overall are treated differently when they report these things as opposed to here in the States. And the media is much more thorough and serious when reporting on this as opposed to the media here in the States. Now, whether that's government influence or it's just the way it's been for all these decades and just going with the status quo,
right.
I won't speculate. But
that's what I was going to ask.
Other than here.
Yeah.
So, it's very interesting. It's a thought-provoking idea. I mean, you go to Spain or Britain, and UFO reports are reported matter-of-factly. They're not made fun of. In the States, it's a totally different scenario here. So,
yeah.
Which leads to the ridicule factor, the fact that individuals don't want to report a sighting because it's treated so differently here. They don't even make fun of. They don't want to face the music. They're not taken seriously. And I've never experienced anything anomalous. I've never seen a UFO myself. But I would think that it's a very intense, thought-provoking experience. Therefore, the last thing you want to experience is, telling somebody about it and being made fun of. I mean, it's no, I imagine not. So that's why a lot of people, I think, don't report it. They don't want to deal with that.
Yeah,
so.
I've definitely heard stories, usually like second-hand accounts of people who have relatives who have very vivid UFO encounters that they never talk about. I think that's a story I've heard several times. My parents saw a UFO, but they never talk about it because they're scared.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very common. It's very unfortunate, but it is common,
Yeah.
There's quality sightings that have been reported. And I always assume, I think, okay, well, most sightings are not reported. Therefore, it's logical to assume that among that huge amount of sightings that are not reported, there's bound to be some great quality sightings with good testimony and the possibility of evidence, but we don't know about them because the individuals didn't say anything. That's not good. I mean, there might be another Roswell somewhere. There might be another Zamora case in Socorro. There might be another strong case out there that is unknown because the individuals that were involved in it just didn't say anything, and it's kind of gone by the wayside.
Yeah,
which is unfortunate. So.
This goes back to what you were saying about the need for more serious scientific study, because this is entirely a situation that would not be the case if this were not considered a fringe topic. You hit
the nail on the head again. Yeah, it was not a fringe topic. It was if it was taken seriously by the public and the scientific community, then individuals would not have any kind of fear of reporting this stuff. So the amount of evidence and sighting data and evidence would be, it would increase exponentially, because we're not down to like 10, 20% of sightings reported. We would be up to 80 or 90% of everything sighted reported. Therefore, we have a lot more, perhaps a better handle on what's going on. It's very difficult to investigate a very, it's a good term, I guess, a non-reproducible event. You can't predict when a UFO occurs or when it's sighted. So it's hard to investigate it when you have such a small percentage of sightings being reported. It's hard to wrap your head around what's really going on. And that's a societal thing. It's because that really cool factor is so prevalent here in the States. It's very problematic for investigators, and couple that with the fact that at MUFON, I have several friends in MUFON. There's a shortage of quality investigators. So there's not only a shortage of cases being reported, there's a shortage of investigators to investigate those cases. So it's a very difficult situation that the UFO community has to deal with, trying to find the answers to this enigma. It's very troubling. So
yeah. Well, we've just got a couple minutes left here. I wanted to ask where the UFO community is sort of going from here, because I've never really thought to keep tabs on what the status is of the UFO community. Is it growing? Is it gaining new members? Is it gaining new capabilities? Is it driving towards some larger goal? These are questions, to be honest, I'd never really thought about, but if anyone would know where the community is going, it would be you.
This is my personal take. It seems like individuals my age or older, and I'm 50 years old as of this year, seem more enamored with a nuts and bolts explanation. That these are physical craft being piloted by occupants. They're flying from somewhere far away. They're physically flying a craft like you would a spacecraft. It seems like it's more prevalent with individuals my age or older.
I'm almost tempted to say as opposed to what? Like that just seems...
As opposed to what's popular now with some of the younger individuals in the community is the time travel scenario.
I see.
Inner Earth. They are us from the future. They're from another dimension. They're from another parallel universe. Kind of non-nuts and bolts, more speculative theories. They're difficult, admittedly, to prove. Those seem more popular in today's community, and I might be dead wrong, but it seems like the majority of individuals that entertain those ideas tend to be the younger members of the community. And another thing that has definitely influenced the community is social media, the internet. You can Google anything you want, and when you find the information you want, you're happy. You don't ask the next question. And before the internet, it was difficult to investigate cases. Therefore, you had to really apply yourself and ask every question like a good lawyer would. Ask the next question, and keep pushing forward. Well, now, gratification is instantaneous. You look it up on Google and you're done. But you're assuming that information is correct. And I'm being sarcastic here. You and I both know everything on the internet is true.
Oh, yeah, that's the case. I've heard that.
I recall on Facebook, I posted on my own personal page. I said, I conduct 0% of my UFO research on the internet. That's true. I will not look anything up on Google. I don't use the internet at all because I just don't trust Google, YouTube, any of those scenarios. No, because it's posted by other people that may have an agenda. It may be legitimately posted by somebody who didn't do their homework. The information may be incorrect and is passed on and then assumed to be correct. So it leaves researchers having to vet and background check all the information on the internet, which is more time and money spent trying to figure this whole scenario out. So I really stay away from the internet, even though my group is on the internet.
Right. But
my research, no, I don't do any research on the internet. I occasionally post videos on from YouTube on my group, but they're strictly interviews. They're strictly presentations. I won't post a picture or a video, a supposed video of a UFO, because there's no way to really know if that's a legitimate anomalous object up there. So I stay away from that.
Interesting.
And it makes it very difficult to do that.
Yeah.
But I it's maybe, and it's probably my age too. So, I'm
right.
old-fashioned.
Well, thought-provoking stuff. Let's just hope more nuts and bolts researchers of the next generation here try to get in on it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've come to the end of the interview here. As always, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Report your UFO sightings, people. You've been listening to Radio Wasteland.